Okay, so I'm going to continue and do a little something on Chapter 5. Now, Chapter 5 relates to deficiencies of the system, unemployment and inflation. I call them deficiencies of the system, um, but they're actually natural byproducts of the way that the system works, and you're going to see that in a minute. So, all right. So first of all, we have measuring the unemployment rate and the labor force participation rate, and that's what we're going to use this for. We're going to take a little bit of a look at that. Then we've also got types of unemployment. So before I get to anything else, um, I'm going to talk about 5.1 and 5.2. We're going to get to inflation in a separate video. I think each of these topics merits its own video. So we've got unemployment. So what this is all based on is, Statistics Canada does something called the Labor Force Survey. So they take a sample of the population. It's Statistics Canada. So they take a sample of the working age population, which is everybody in the country who happens to be 15 years of age or more. I don't know, maybe there's a citizenship requirement, maybe there isn't. Let's not break it down that much. But everyone who's in the country who is 15 years of age or more and qualifies for work, I suppose. You have to qualify to be able to work in the country. So that is the working age population. And they ask them a series of questions, but the basis of it is, do you have a job? Now, you could be on maternity leave, or you could be on any kind of parental leave. You could be temporarily laid up. There are all kinds of reasons why you might consider that a gray area, but basically, if you're employed, if you have a job, you're employed. We talk about this a little later, but even if you're just making ice cream cones one night on the weekend, you're still counted as employed. So it doesn't matter the level of your employment, you're employed. You have a small business, employed. So for the purposes of this, who is employed? If you say, no, I don't have a job, then they're going to ask you, are you looking for work? Are you actively in the process of trying to change that situation and you would like to have a job? If you say yes to that question, then you are counted as unemployed. If you say no to that question, then you are considered to be out of the labor force. Okay, and in our society, if you don't work, you don't eat. So I'm deliberately scaling it down there to the point where, some people are out of the labor force because they simply have enough resources and they don't feel a need to get into the labor force. They may not have a job. If you're self-employed as a day trader, technically you're still in this category. But if you're not working, you might have had an injury and you've been decommissioned from the workforce in some way, or you're 16 and you don't feel like working yet, whatever it happens to be, you're out of the labor force. You're not looking for work. There is a percentage of these people who have been previously part of this category, which is the unemployed, those looking for work, but that can be a dispiriting process. You have to be able to go out and sell yourself in the world, find, and you, because of the system that we have, you bear the cost of getting yourself there. You're in college right now. You are right now bearing the cost of bringing forward some of your potential into the labor force. So the cost of that is borne by the unemployed. And so it is of no surprise to anyone that eventually some people just become dispirited workers. I think that's what they call it in the book, dispirited workers who just sink into this category or develop, become injured on an emotional or a mental level through a sustained period of unemployment, that they find themselves in this category, out of the workforce, because they've just given up. And there, we could call some of these the casualties. The casualties. And the casualties generally don't get counted because they're lumped into this category. What we do consider is the labor force. The labor force. So that is, if you look at your supply and demand, here's your supply. People are often confused about this, and it's no surprise. We don't like to think of ourselves this way, but as going out into the labor market, we are one of the suppliers of labor, and the demanders of labor are here, right? So the theory here is that, the more of this supply we have, we can move out this way, and hopefully we can drive down the equilibrium price of labor. That's been something that's happened over the course of time. Labor movements have tried to keep that up, but the allegation is that then creates a labor shortage, and the employer is on this side, and the employer can determine that. So lots of reasons for unemployment, or why someone might become dispirited and drop out of the labor force. In any case, what our labor force is, and what we're really talking about, is this part of the population. This is the labor force. Labor force. In our production possibility curve, we talked about the frontier, the maximum we could produce given the resources that we have. So some of those resources locked in there are our labor force, whatever that happens to be. So that is the actual term. So the labor force is the employed plus the unemployed, according to this statistic. Anyone who is not in here is in here. So you're either in the labor force or you're out of the labor force. Now, when we talk about the unemployment rate, we're just focusing on this portion. So let's say, our whole survey of the working age population, 15 plus, in this one particular island we live on, there are 10 people. 10 people who happen to be over the age of 15 in that population. And we're going to say that 5 of them are employed, 3 of them are unemployed, and 2 of them are right out of the labor force. One's a casualty and the other one is a rich heiress who doesn't have to work. So our labor force consists of 5 plus 3 equals 8. So we have 8 people in our labor force. So this is our labor force. So what we're going to do, if we want to calculate our unemployment rate, this is what we're going to do. We're going to take these 3, divide it by our total labor force, and we're going to get a number. There we are. There's our unemployment rate. 37.5% of the people who are the potential labor force are in this category of being unemployed. Not working, but looking for work. Okay, so that's what we're counting. And when you hear in the press, what is the unemployment rate? That's what we're talking about. The number of unemployed people, sort of the potential labor force versus the kinetic. So what portion of the labor force is merely potential, looking for work. Then, the book also does a couple of other things. We talk about the labor force participation rate. So what is the size of our labor force? So labor force equals 8. The working age population equals 10. So if we want to know what percentage of this whole population is involved in the labor force at all, we're going to say 8 out of 10 equals 80%. So that is our labor force participation rate. Labor force participation rate. I don't know if anybody calls it LFPR, but that's what it is, the labor force participation rate. In Canada, I've seen that generally loom around the 65% mark. But remember, if we have, we may have a growing population in Canada, like this might move up to 12, but if both of those extra 2 people wind up down here, dispirited, because it's just too hard to bear the cost of unemployment, if they wind up in this bucket, it doesn't change these numbers at all, And if we get more and more people turning 15, and it's just a pipeline right into here, right? So that's going to depend on a lot of things. The book does one other thing, and they calculate the percentage of employed people, what percentage of the working age population has a job. So you would just take the number of people who have a job and divide it by the working age population. But is 50%. But the magic of an equation like that is that the way to calculate it is right in the name of the calculation. The one we really want to drive home is this unemployment rate. Mine's outrageous here, 37.5%. It's usually around, I don't know, I think the last thing I read was somewhere between 5 and 7%. It's kind of hard to calculate because of something we'll talk about in the next video. But we want to be able to calculate the size of the labor force and recognize that the unemployment rate is only these 3 divided by only this section.